you now to listen to more of David's story as told through the prophet Nathan.
My name is Nathan. I'm prophet to King David of Israel. I've come to tell you a story. It's an ancient story, but timeless. It's also a complex tale, one filled with intrigue and betrayals and battles and lust and sin. I see I've captured your attention. It's a story of King David. David, he was like a son to me, that boy, that shepherd, that man, that warrior, that poet, that lover, that psalmist, that king. My earliest memories of David, many years ago, King Saul and Israel were at war with the Philistines. Now, we were always at war, but that's another story for another day. The two armies were camped out on hilltops facing each other across the Elah Valley. Now, for those of you that want to know, the Elah Valley is southwest of Bethlehem and about halfway to the sea. Now, the Philistines had this champion who came from their city-state Gath, and his name was Goliath. Goliath from Gath. I have never seen such a man. He was 9 foot tall if he was an inch, 450 pounds of pure muscle, meaner than a junkyard dog, and ugly as sin. I never thought that God could even imagine such a man, much less make one. Twice a day, for 40 days, Goliath terrorized all of Israel. It was so bad that King Saul offered to open up the doors of his treasury and give the hand in marriage of his youngest daughter to the man who would kill Goliath. There were no takers. Now, war was fought differently in those days. Each army had champions, and they could decide the outcome of a battle in individual combat. Goliath taunted us continually, along with his rooting section, the entire Philistine army. Come on, you cowards! Pick a champion and come fight me. If he wins, the Philistines will be your slaves. But if I win, you will be our slaves and serve us. Come on and bring your puny God with you. None of our warriors would come near him. Then, out of the field came little David. He couldn't have been more than 15 years old. Now, he was the youngest of 7 sons, and he tended the sheep for his father Jesse. Now, Jesse had sent him to the front with food for his brothers who were fighting the Philistines. And David happened to enter the camp just as Goliath challenged the Israelites. And David became outraged, and he approached King Saul, and he said, I'll go kill Goliath in the name of the God of Israel. King Saul started laughing. Goliath started laughing. The warriors on both sides started laughing. Now, when Saul finally caught his breath, he said, "You're too young and inexperienced." And Goliath, he's been a warrior all his life. You don't stand a chance. But listen to what David said to him. "I am a shepherd, tending the sheep for my father. When a lion or a bear takes a lamb from the flock, I go after it, knock it down, and rescue the lamb. If it turns on me, I wring its neck and kill it. Lion or bear, it doesn't matter. And I'll do the same thing to this Philistine pig who is defying our God. God who delivers me from the teeth of the lion and the claws of the bear will also deliver me from this Philistine." Saul, figuring, what do I have to lose? Suited David up in the armor of a warrior and gave him his sword. The armor was so heavy that David couldn't even walk, much less carry that sword. So finally, David, he took off that armor and he bent down and he picked up his sling. And he also bent down and picked up 5 smooth stones from the riverbed and went out to face Goliath. "Come to me and I will feed your flesh to the animals," Goliath said. "I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, God of Israel, whom you have defied," replied that boy. And then he stopped and he reached into his pouch and he pulled a stone. About like this one. And he loaded his sling up. And he went to meet the giant. Nailed him right between the eyes. Have you ever seen a big oak tree chopped down? That's what Goliath looked like when he fell. David ran over, picked up Goliath's sword, and chopped his head off. And he reached down and he picked up the head of Goliath and he put it over his head to where all could see, and the Philistines fled in terror, chased by the Israelite army all the way back to the sea. It's the bravest thing I've ever seen. David had no fear. None. Now, after Goliath died, I thought, it's David. He's no ordinary human being. And Saul knew it too. And with the assistance of Jonathan, who's Saul's oldest son, Saul soon set up David as a commander in the Israelite army. And that started a long and complicated relationship between David and Saul, whose jealousy and mental instability would plague David until the old man died. You see, Saul was the first king of Israel, but he had been disobedient to God, and God had chosen David to be his successor. Thus, Saul's jealousy and paranoia. But that's a story for another day. For many years, David was torn with his love and affection for Jonathan, who had become his dearest and closest friend, and their mutual fear of King Saul. As the years went on, Saul's jealousy of David's skill and ability, and also his relationship with God, deepened. And there were many occasions that he tried to kill his heir apparent. But each time God saved David. And there were a couple of times that David could have killed Saul, but David's complete faith in God made him not raise his hand. And the book says that David would not lift his hand against the Lord's anointed. Well, there came a time when King Saul and Jonathan were killed in battle, and David ascended to the throne of Judah. Now, in that time, there was civil war between Judah in the south and Israel in the north. Oh, it was a time of tremendous unrest and a lot of bloodshed. But with the blessing of God and the skill and wisdom and ability of a true leader, David was able to unite the kingdom. He once and for all was victorious over the Philistines. He recaptured the chest of God, which you may know as the Ark of the Covenant, from the Philistines and carried it back to his new capital city of Jerusalem. Now, there were many wars and victories after that, but that's a story for another day. David was the most faithful man I've never known anyone as faithful as David. He prayed constantly. He prayed in the morning when he got up. He prayed during the day. He prayed before dinner in the evening. He prayed before he went to bed. He knew that his achievements were not because of him, but because of God. He asked for God's guidance continually and continuously, and he listened to what God had to say. He wrote songs of praise to God. He wrote poetry. He wrote psalms. He sang them, always singing of the mercy of God. He danced before God, and he even played instruments, and yes, that includes the drums and the cymbals before God. And I, Nathan, know this to be true because one day he came to me and he said, "Nathan, I live in this beautiful mansion built of cedar on top of a mountain, and God lives in a box in a tent. I'm going to build him a house." And I said, "Sire, do what's on your heart, because God is with you." But that night, God came to me, and he said,
"Go and tell my servant David, you are building me a house? Why, I haven't lived in a house since I brought the children of Israel up from Egypt till now. All that time I've lived in a tent. Tell my servant David, I took you from the pasture and made you king over my people Israel. Now I'm making you famous to be ranked with the greatest names on earth. I will give you peace from all your enemies. Furthermore, I will build you a house. When your life is complete and you are buried, I'll raise up your son to succeed you, and I'll firmly establish his rule. I will be a father to him, and he will be my son. I will never remove my gracious love from him and your family, and his royal throne will be permanently secured."
When I told David these words from God, he fell to his knees and worshiped, saying, "Oh God, who am I and who is my family that you have brought me to this place in life? You know who I am and you know what I am, and it is not I that you have done this for, but it is you who have done this for me. You have opened your heart, but you have made me a part of it. And because of that, I love you, I worship you. There is no God but you." And because of David, peace, equity, and justice were found among the people. And with the blessing of God and his grace and mercy, the people of Israel prospered. And like the book says in its oldest story, it was very good. For a while, it seems like even for a united Israel who is ruled by a good and wise king who does what is right in the eyes of the Lord, trouble is always lurking nearby. Trouble for David began when the king of the Ammonites died. Well, they live east of the Jordan River. And David sent emissaries of peace to the new king. But the new king was suspicious and believed that David was going to attack them, so he didn't welcome those emissaries of peace in peace. He shaved their beards, he cut their pants off, and he made them walk home half naked. Very shameful. Very, very shameful. And a war started from which there would be no easy peace. You know, the Ammonites even hired the neighboring Arameans as mercenaries to wage war on Israel. But David and his warriors defeated the Arameans, and the war with the Ammonites continued. And this is where my story turns. Not on the outcome or the cause of this war, but on the actions of David. When the season for war started, David broke tradition. He sent his warriors out to do battle, but he stayed in Jerusalem. Now, I don't know why he stayed in Jerusalem. Maybe he was tired, maybe he was sick. But you know what? Maybe he just didn't want to go. And he said, well, I'm the king, and I don't want to go. So one day, he happened to be walking on the roof of his house, surveying his kingdom. Maybe he was bored. You know what they say about an idle mind in the devil's workshop. But as he walked along his roof, surveying his kingdom, he happened to look down on a neighbor's roof, and he saw the most beautiful woman he had ever seen in his life. And she was bathing. And David became obsessed. And he sent out his servants to inquire about her. And the report came back that her name was Bathsheba, and she was married to Uriah the Hittite, who was a loyal commander in David's army and who was at the front fighting. Well, you have to remember, David had absolute power in Israel. His word was law. What he said went. If he wanted something, he got it. And what he wanted right then was Bathsheba. So he summoned her to the palace and he took her to his bed. And then he sent her home. And life went back to normal for a while. Then he got a note from Bathsheba. I'm pregnant. And David panicked. But David was the king, and he had a plan. He sent a message to the front. General Joab, send Uriah the Hittite to me. When Uriah got to the palace, David sat him down and asked him how the war was going. Hey, how's the war going? How's the food? How's your generals? How's your men? And then he said, that was a long, hard journey back here. Why don't you go home and take a bath and have a meal and visit your wife Bathsheba and get a good night's sleep? You see, in that time there was no paternity suits and no DNA testing. When Uriah left the palace, David sent an informant after him, and the report came back that Uriah had not gone home. What's up with that? David, though, still the king, went to plan B. He brought Uriah back and said, why don't you go home and visit your wife Bathsheba? And David said to him, Uriah said to King David, the chest of God and the warriors of Judah and Israel are in the field in tents. I will not go home and enjoy my wife Bathsheba as long as they are roughing it. And that is what I will do. King David said, okay, have it your own way. But while you're here, let's have lunch. And then he got Uriah drunk. Good plan B. Except Uriah didn't go home. He went back to the palace gates and he slept with the king's servants for a second night. The next day, David sent him back to the front, along with a letter to General Joab that instructed the general to attack the city, and when they came out to defend themselves, to pull back except for Uriah. And of course, Uriah was killed. And they sent word back to Jerusalem that Uriah was dead. And Bathsheba grieved for the appropriate amount of time, and then David married her. David, shepherd, man, warrior, poet, lover, psalmist, king, adulterer, liar, thief, and murderer. Israel went on and won the war, but that's completely irrelevant to my story today. David thought that that was that. Nobody knew. David had forgotten about God and all of his intrigue and deceit and his sin. But God hadn't forgot about David. God was furious with David. And he sent me to him. Now, I have been called to be prophet to the people of Israel by God. My role as prophet, I speak the truth to those in power, regardless of what that truth may be. And a lot of times it's words of judgment. God told me about David's shame. Now, I had to confront the man I admired more than anybody that I have ever met in my life. It would have been silly for me to go in and just speak the truth to David. He's a proud man, and he would have denied it outright. So I told him a parable. One time there were two men lived in a city. One extremely wealthy. He owned thousands of flocks of sheep and hundreds of head of cattle. The other man was dirt poor, and he had bought one lamb, a female lamb, which he brought home and raised like a member of the family. He fed it off his table. He let it drink out of his cup. It slept in his bed. It was like a daughter to him. Well, one day, the rich man had a traveler stop in. And the rich man didn't want to take one of his animals for the feast. He was so stingy that he went and he took that little lamb, prepared a meal, and fed his guest. David exploded. As surely as God lives, that man should be hanged. He must repay that man 4 times over for the lamb, for his crime and his stinginess. And I said, you are that man, David. And God, the God of Israel, has this to say to you.
I made you king over Israel. I freed you from the fist of Saul, and I gave you his daughter. If that wasn't enough, I would have thrown in more. because you murdered Uriah and took his wife as your wife and treated God with such contempt, killing and murder will continually plague your family. I will take your wives from you and give them to your neighbor. You did your act in secret. I will do mine where the whole nation will see."
And David wept. He confessed everything, all of his sins to God. "Have mercy on me, O God, according to your steadfast ways. According to your abundant mercy, blot out my transgressions. Wash me thoroughly from my iniquity and cleanse me from my own sin, for I know my transgressions and my sin is ever before me. Against you, you alone have I sinned and done what is evil in your name, so that you are justified in your sentence and blameless when you pass judgment. Indeed, I was born guilty, a sinner, when my mother conceived me. You desire truth in the inward being, therefore teach me wisdom in my secret heart. Purge me with hyssop, and I shall be clean. Wash me, and I shall be whiter than snow. Let me hear your joy and gladness. Let the bones that you have crushed rejoice. Hide your face from my sins and blot out all my iniquities. Create in me a clean heart, O God. Do not cast me away from your presence, and do not take your Holy Spirit from me. Restore to me your joy and salvation, and sustain me in me a willing spirit." This is not the end of the story. Far from it. The rest of David's story deals with him living in the consequences of his sin. All sin has consequences. If the history of Israel has taught us anything, it's that. It would be good for us to remember that all of us have sinned and fallen way short of God's glory. Even King David. You know, the most worthy can fall from the heights. But God will forgive you if you make confession and repent. Even a murderer like David. And you know that promise that God made to David about his royal kingdom never ending? That would come to pass several hundred years later in Bethlehem. In spite of all the scandal and sin, Christ came. Though the people forgot about God, Christ came. In spite of all the noise and the pandemonium and the chaos, Christ came. And that is our story for today.